Sanders at the bottom of that pile.
Behind the net, the Sanders and Orr! On the Orr! Orr to the Boston Bruins! Play made. The puck is drawn to his feet. With the big zipper. Hold it. Hold it. You're not that pretty. I'm a bad man. Let's shoot up the wall. Reggie Jackson is in his third home run of the game. That's right out of the air. The ball is pulled in by Baker Head.
Hello, I'm Chris Fowler for SportsCentury. He had the face of a cherub, but there was the devil running through him. His game was angelic, and his desire to win was satanic. Isiah Thomas III produced one national collegiate championship and 2 NBA titles because he not only made those around him better, he made them tougher. That he learned on Chicago's West Side.
Chicago is a city of ethnic pockets and certainly one of the most segregated big cities in America.
On the west side of Chicago, you grow up thinking of ways to survive. When I go back home, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, I remember that I wouldn't walk down the sidewalk. I'd run down the street, because if you walk down the sidewalk, somebody can just jump out at you.
Gangs, drugs, that was a part of what was going on around in that neighborhood.
The disenfranchised are looking for a voice. These are people who are otherwise ignored, people who don't have jobs, and they're saying, hey, we're people too. If it takes a gun or some other weapon to enforce that, we want people to respect us.
Basketball was a way out of the neighborhood and a way to help their families. And you could go in those areas, and at 11 o'clock at night, they had lights in the playgrounds and they were playing.
It's a hard game. Someone's going to get in your face, so you better learn how to take it. And you better learn how to give it back.
If an athlete is perhaps on the borderline of wanting to be part of a gang and yet show some athletic skills on the basketball court, I think the gang members respect a guy who can play.
Isiah takes it to the hoop and he hits. He's fearless.
Isiah used to watch the games and say, you know what? All this can't be bad. You know, so he kind of incorporated that into his basketball style. This gang mentality.
I'm telling you, he's got the guts of a burglar.
He would challenge anybody, anywhere, at any time. And that has to come from your background. I don't think you just acquire it once you get here to the NBA.
He'd cut your heart out to win, and he would put it right there on the floor in front of you, and he'd step on it. And, I mean, that's Isiah.
Isiah just wanted to embarrass you as a basketball player when you were trying to defend him. He wanted to humiliate you.
There was a basketball toughness, meanness in him that if he could beat you by 40, he was going to beat you. I mean, and on the night when he had it going, he was just going to make sure you didn't forget it.
In the finals in 1990 against Portland, I saw him take a shot and leave the floor bleeding around his mouth, and he was nearly knocked out. Next thing I know, I turn to my right and I see him walk into the scorer's table to check back in.
Thomas slices through the defense to get a basket.
Isiah always wanted the pressure. The last shot of the game, he wanted it in his hands. He wanted it his way.
Isiah turns, guns, it goes!
Chuck Daly was the perfect coach for him because he understood his greatness and he understood his life was built around fighting against everybody and everything to get where he is.
Quick move to the hoop, Dave got fouled, and now Isiah Thomas and Cartwright are swinging. We got a big one going in the stadium.
Some people thought that at times he was a dirty player, but he was 6 feet tall, and he had to do everything he could to survive on the court.
We're not shooting until the final second. If I make it, we win. If I miss it, we're going in overtime.
Once when the Pistons were struggling, Chuck got upset with his team, and in the middle of a huddle, he turns to Isiah and screams at him. He said, "Isiah, what is it that you do best?" And Isiah said, "Lead." And Chuck pointed a finger at him and said, "Well then, leave."
With street-groomed audacity and brilliant ball control, Isiah Thomas instilled a take-no-prisoners mentality in the Pistons. Reminiscent of Hollywood's Dirty Dozen, they turned the basketball court into a battlefield.
You played those Pistons teams, you know you were going to get mugged. And he was like the leader of the pack.
When it was time to take care of business, he became the dictator. Isiah Thomas made Rick Mahorn tough. One of the first things he told Rick is, "You're fat." A lot of guys on that team didn't like him, but you listened to him. You followed him, because Isiah would fight you.
It was my job not only to follow his leadership, but also to make sure others conformed to what we were trying to get accomplished. So I was more the sergeant of arms, implementing his direction.
Isiah built that pattern where we were very tough-nosed defensive guys. And every day at practice, Chuck Daly just said, "Hey, here's the ball, play for your minutes." And guys would literally, we'd fight. Didn't matter. We'd fight each other on the court.
All of a sudden, the Oakland Raiders had sent T-shirts and hats because Isiah had said, "We're like the bad boys, like the old Oakland Raiders."
The league looked on us as bandits, as tough, aggressive hooligans.
He had that cherubic look, the innocent little smile.
What do you think the biggest obstacle is for the Pistons in the playoffs?
The other team that we're playing against.
But that was all a camouflage. That masked the real Isiah. The real Isiah was a predator.
Isiah rubbed a lot of people the wrong way in the basketball community. Forget media, just in the basketball circles.
Isiah is a very pesky little guy. You know, he's a guy who sometimes out there can have a little attitude with you.
There was always this basic distrust of him. Is he more like this street, tough Chicago kid, or is he more like this smiling, cherubic guy? Which one is it? We don't trust these city instincts not to come out, and I think the answer is Isiah Thomas is both of them.
When it came to basketball, from the smallest to the tallest, we were good. I mean, nobody could beat us.
The Thomas family's basketball skills were learned on Chicago's West Side, where Isiah and his 8 siblings were raised. Their parents, Mary and Isiah II, came from Mississippi. The relocation, however, didn't diffuse the father's deep anger engendered by life in the Deep South.
He hated basketball. He hated all forms of entertainment. He used to tell us that entertainment came out of slavery. And he didn't like that African-American men would perform in an arena for white males. He was very bitter and very angry with the system and the way life was for him.
My father was always doing something violent to my mother. Everything that happened to him in the outside world, he brought it home. So instead of striking out at somebody on the outside, he was always doing it to her. Always.
My mother used to tell my father that as soon as I graduated from high school, they were going to separate. Well, of course, I never believed it. But that day when we got home from the graduation, my father's bags were packed.
It was sad that my father was leaving, but it was also a joyous occasion because what he was doing to my mother, it's not going to happen anymore.
Isiah was 6 when his father moved out. Although his mother worked tirelessly to provide for her family, she couldn't always cover basic costs. One night, crime came calling and demanded a payment that can't be measured in money.
It was gangs draft day in the ghetto, and this was the vice lords. And about 25 of them at night, they knocked on the door, and the leader said to Mary Thomas, "I want one of your sons."
And I goes back in the house, gets the shotgun, and I come out, and I told him it wasn't but one gang, and that was the Thomas gang. You get off of my porch, or I'll blow you across the expressway. And I meant that.
As good of a woman as my mother is, and God knows she's a angel. She just couldn't handle all of us by herself.
One by one, Isiah's 6 older brothers were drawn by the lure of the streets, where drugs, danger, even death beckoned.
My brother, Lord Henry, would come home, and he'd be in the washroom for 4 and 5 hours. You know, you'd be knocking on the door, and I'll be out in a minute. Why is he in the washroom so long? Because he's using drugs.
That life was very appealing to me at that time because that's all I knew. That's what our neighborhood was about. It was about hustling, pimping. I don't know if I really understood at that point that I had another choice.
But for the athletically gifted Isiah, basketball proved a stronger magnet than the streets. A local hoops legend by 10, he was kept from straying by the vigilance of his brothers.
If he had done something that he shouldn't have done, he'd get that lecture from his brothers. It's like he'd sit in the middle of a room in a chair, and they'd all be around him. Everyone would be, you know, screaming, yelling, threatening, whatever. They lived that life. They didn't want us to be a part of it.
My brothers, they would look at Isiah and say, look, you don't do what I do. You do what I say. I mean, don't think I'm happy doing the things I'm doing, because I'm not.
They took an active role in going around looking for high schools for him. They took Isiah out to Gene Pingatore at St. Joe's, and my brother told Gene he'll put St. Joe's on the map. They were like his agent.
In the fall of 1975, Thomas enrolled at St. Joseph Catholic School, a 90-minute one-way commute to the predominantly white suburb of Westchester.
You had to get up at 4 just to get there on time. We had to take 2 CTA buses to the L, take that to the end of the line, get off the L, get on the number 17 Westchester bus, take that all the way to the end of the line, then we had to walk a mile to school. Now think about this. This is Chicago, wintertime.
I drive Isiah home a number of times, and you know, I'd ask, what are you going to eat when you get home? He said, probably nothing. What do you mean? Well, Mom cooks, puts it there, first come, first serve, and by the time I get home, there just won't be anything left.
Basketball was the only thing that I could do that totally consumed me. Whenever I played basketball, I was never hungry. It became the place where I went to get pleasure, to get away from pain.
After every single game, my brothers would sit him in a chair and they would critique everything that he did wrong. I remember the Christmas tournament, Isiah had a terrible game. We get home from the game, he sits down and they said, oh no, put your clothes on. And it was late, like 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. It had snowed really bad. And my mother, where are you going? Where are you taking him? We're going to the court. To the court?
As a junior and senior, he led St. Joe to a 57-5 record. Named Chicago's top high school player in his last year, Thomas had already reduced dozens of scholarship offers to DePaul and Indiana.
When you came for a visit, you met with me and my mother first. And then you had to meet with all the boys.
Bobby Knight went to their home and used his typical bravado, and it came on a little bit too strong for some of Isiah's brothers, and Lord Henry stood up and they went chest to chest with each other.
Well, there were a lot of interesting things that took place. There were a lot of things that detracted from our visit.
In December of 1978, Thomas announced he would play for Knight at Indiana, located 230 miles and a world away from his roots on the west side of Chicago.
What could Bobby Knight say that hasn't already been said or hasn't already been done? The best fights of Isiah's life were fought on the west side of Chicago.
Lad, you're not getting any pressure on anybody. You're not dropping back in to help out. Tommy, you're not keeping Wilk from getting a basketball.
In the summer of 1979, before he arrived at Indiana, Isiah Thomas first felt Bobby Knight's sting when he trained under the coach for the Pan Am Games in Puerto Rico.
Isiah Thomas had already been kicked out of practice,
And it was the second time that he'd been kicked out, and things didn't look real good for Isiah continuing his basketball at IU at the time. And Coach Matt had already told him, you might as well just transfer. You'll never be able to play for us. You're too selfish.
What Isiah was a little bit immature. He was a player with great ability, very bright, somewhat immature in terms of his outlook on what was important and what wasn't.
It was, how much can I let Isiah be Isiah, but how much can I still make sure that people know this is Indiana basketball under Bob Knight? And so every time Isiah would do something spectacular that was out of the previous mold, people would watch Isiah, then all eyes would go to the bench.
As a player at Indiana, I wondered every day, you know, can I make it through? How am I going to make it through? And do I really want to be here?
He just called me and told me that he was coming home. And I said, what? He said, because I'm sick of Knight hollering at me.
But Thomas stayed, and Knight kept hollering. At the end of the 1980 season, he was the first freshman in history to make All Big Ten, averaging 15 points and 6 assists. If Isiah was less selfish, his will to win burned deeper than ever.
The jump ball goes up, and while the ball is in the air, I just happened to catch Isiah. He takes the Kentucky guy near him, Kyle Macy, and he gave him a tremendous whack in the chest. And Macy looked at him with a look of incredulous, and Isiah flashed that famous Isiah smile, that choir boy smile.
He would hit you in your chest if you wasn't doing the right thing, because he wanted to win that bad. He would get on you like Coach. I mean, Coach never hit me, but Isiah has hit me.
Further molding himself to Knight's design, Thomas led Indiana to the 1981 National Championship and was voted the Final Four's most outstanding player.
It is over! Indiana wins the national championship for 1981. Unbelievable as the players out on the floor are jumping up and down, hugging one another.
We're going to see you back in an IU red uniform next year?
I hope so.
But 3 months earlier, in the cold aftermath of a visit to Paradise, Thomas privately decided to turn pro.
I remember coming home from Hawaii, a Christmas tournament. When I got back to Chicago, my girlfriend dropped me off at the house. There was no lights, no heat, no phone, no one's home. And I remember walking through the house, and it looked like a bomb had went off in the house. And I went to the window and I saw my girlfriend driving off. And I just stood there crying. That's when I knew that I had to do something.
Oh, I thought he would leave when I was walking off the floor in Philadelphia. I told Jimmy Cruz that I thought we had seen the last of Isiah Thomas as a player for us.
Detroit picks 6'1", 180 pounds, Isiah Thomas of the University of Indiana.
Drafted second overall by the Pistons, Thomas provided instant star power to a team that had won 21 games the previous season. Averaging 20 points and 8 assists over his first 2 seasons, the 6'1" point guard made Detroit respectable.
What a move by Isiah! He has lighted this place up!
He's a kid that could do whatever he wanted on the basketball court, just on pure talent. At first, Isiah was a little hesitant, taking instructions from a head coach, Scotty Robertson, at that time. I remember him, you know, with his southern drawl saying, now, you can't do that. Somewhere along the line, that clicked, and he realized that as a point guard, I'm an extension of the coach.
Thomas made his first playoff appearance in 1984 after Chuck Daly took over as head coach. In their opening round series with the Knicks, the Pistons were down 8 points with under 2 minutes left in the deciding 5th game. Then Thomas took over.
Isiah Thomas coming back.
He was in a supernatural zone. I mean, it was just like summer leagues on the playground. I mean, he came up with every kind of shot that you could imagine a guy could come up with.
Isiah, it's within 36 seconds left.
New York was frustrated, thinking, you know, we've done everything we can, and now we're letting one guy beat us.
Isiah, three-point attempt. He's got it for time.
In an electrifying display of firepower, Thomas scored 16 points in the last 94 seconds, forcing an overtime which New York won. Undeterred, Thomas remained in the hunt for a championship.
When we used to be in the playoff games in the Garden, I would see Isiah in the stands. He would be watching, listening.
calculated. He learned by hanging around the Lakers of the early 80s. He was in L.A. for every one of those games. And he was in our locker room. And he took it all in because he knew he was going to get there.
Here's Isiah. Let's see what we got. All the way up. Goal!
In 1987, Isiah Thomas led his strong supporting cast, Bill Laimbeer, Adrian Dantley, and Joe Dumars, into the Eastern Conference Finals against the defending champion Celtics. Up by a point in Game 5, the Pistons were 5 seconds away from taking a 3-2 lead back to Detroit.
That was probably the best game that I had played in my pro career. I was really good that game.
It's blocked, and Seasting hit it off of a Detroit player. No, they're going to give the ball to Detroit.
When the ball went out of bounds, I remember the official standing there with the ball, and he started his count. And he got to 1, and he got to 2, and I panicked.
So as I was rising to call a timeout, he quickly threw the ball back toward their goal.
Now there's a steal by Bird. Underneath the DJ, lays it in. Right at 1 second left. What a play by Bird.
What was so devastating about it is that I was the go-to guy for the Pistons, and that was the first mistake that I had ever made in a game like that. I was probably at the lowest moment that I had ever been in my basketball career. I just didn't know how I was going to come out of it.
In the locker room after losing to the Celtics in the 7th game, Pistons rookie Dennis Rodman dropped a bomb by saying that if Boston forward Larry Bird were black, he'd be considered just another good player.
Dennis at that time was, coming into his own. It was pure frustration. And naturally, Isiah, being the captain and team leader, backed his teammate.
But I'd have to agree with Rodman. If he was black, he'd be just another good guy.
The original response by Isiah was, I didn't say anything wrong. They really, in their hearts, did not think it was a big deal. And I was, man, this is a real big deal.
To snuff what had become a public relations blaze, Thomas flew to Los Angeles, where the Celtics were playing the Lakers for the title, and apologized publicly for his part in the slur against Bird.
The comments that were made the other night by me, I was joking about them.
We could all sort of understand Dennis Rodman saying it. He was a rookie, he was callow, he was unenlightened. Isiah Thomas was none of that. Isiah Thomas was shrewd, Isiah Thomas was smart.
In 1988, Thomas led Detroit past Boston and into the finals against Los Angeles, where he would duel the king of Showtime, Magic Johnson, an old friend and opponent in pickup games.
We were both the devil in disguise, and now here come two passionate guys about winning, but also good friends, playing against each other for the first time in the finals. It was tough.
They used to kiss before a game, but when Detroit became competitive and they went for a championship, that friendship ceased.
Thomas hit by Magic Johnson, and Magic went after him there with a forearm. That was a bad play by Magic Johnson.
Leading 3-2, the Pistons were ahead in the third quarter of Game 6. Thomas was on fire, scoring 14 points in less than 5 minutes.
Thomas hits a big one. Isiah Thomas is hurt down on the court underneath the basket.
I touched his ankle, and he hit me upside my head so hard. And it wasn't like he was upset at me that I touched his ankle as much as, son of a gun. You worked your entire career to get to this point, and what is this?
And we see right now that Isiah's coming back in the ball game.
He was that guy that through broken bones or broken fingers or bruises or sprained ankles or sickness, he would still be out there competing at such a high level.
Thomas off balance, basket counts and a foul.
on a sprained ankle, Thomas scored another 11 in the third period, setting a finals record, 25 points in a quarter. He finished the game with 43, but it wasn't enough as the Lakers won 103-102.
It's over. We go to Game 7. A sensational individual effort by Isiah Thomas.
Then in Game 7, with the injured Thomas only able to play 28 minutes, the Pistons lost. Meanwhile, a bond between Thomas and team owner Bill Davidson was strengthening.
I remember when I first went there, I said, Bill, be careful about falling in love with players because things happen. He said, no, I love Isiah. And they were so close. We used to call Isiah his son.
When Adrian Dantley was traded to Dallas for Thomas's friend Mark Aguirre in early 1989, the point guard was said to be involved.
This trade here, the circumstances surrounding it was so unusual. I just needed some time to sort things out.
There was personality conflicts between Isiah Thomas and Adrian Dantley. I was in the dressing room. Adrian Dantley called me over, and he said, there's a lot of people here I don't like. And he said, he's the #1 guy. And he pointed right at Isiah. I don't like him, and you can print that.
All great players are locker room politicians. Isiah Thomas could certainly get rid of players. The difference was nobody was quite able to believe Isiah when he would claim otherwise.
I'm sure they asked him numerous times his opinion. I at no time ever heard him going and dictating to anybody what should be done. That was not his style.
The problem with Isiah was that he did have a political side to him. He was very strong in the union. He had a way of maneuvering behind the scenes that some people didn't like.
With Aguirre, the Pistons dominated the regular season and finished with 63 victories. In the playoffs, after sweeping Bird Celtics and Milwaukee, Thomas and the Pistons kept their eyes on the prize in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Jordan-led Bulls.
Isiah with a stutter step to the baseline.
After closing out the Bulls, Detroit faced the Lakers, who had gone 11-0 that postseason. But with Magic Johnson and Byron Scott injured, the Pistons powered to their first NBA title.
He's got the ball. He should have it. Isiah hangs onto the ball, flips it up to the rafters. Detroit is the city of champions again.
The only accomplishment that mattered at that time was how many championships you won, and Bird and Magic would let you know that. That year, we beat Bird, Jordan, and Magic, slayed all of them. That was validation.
Thomas and the Bad Boys were back in the finals the next year, this time against Portland. Late in Game 1, he took charge.
Thomas again for 3. He's amazing. When they go down and talk at the Hall of Fame for street shooters, his name is right at the top of the list.
Scoring 16 of his 33 points in the last 7 minutes, Thomas, who was later named Finals MVP, propelled the Pistons to victory and set the stage for a second straight NBA title.
He was going to make it to the top because he was a true warrior out on the court and had a run at point guard for about 4 years. It could have been some of the best point guard player in the history of the NBA.
But the day after clinching the title, a Detroit TV station reported that a number of personal checks signed by Thomas had been subpoenaed by an investigation into illegal sports gambling.
I remember talking to him and saying, Isiah, I have to write a story about these rumors. And he was saying, well, why would you ever do that? These are rumors. It always stuck with me that this story broke about Isiah right after the championship, and I think that is really sad.
One of 20 indicted on charges of racketeering and money laundering involving at least $6 million was Emmett Denha, a close friend of Thomas. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison. A Michigan-based U.S. attorney assigned to the case said Thomas was never a target of its investigation.
I want all of you to know I never do anything to let this city or you people down. Thank you.
Nearly 7 years later, a book entitled Money Players cited 6 unidentified sources that claimed Thomas lost as much as $1 million in high-stakes dice games run by members of organized crime.
They were false attacks, and they were all lies. But understanding who I am in the world of sports and entertainment, that's part of the game. It hurts, but how can you fight it?
He was associated with people he shouldn't have been. And even if you don't do anything, their actions kind of stick on you. Whether he did it or not, some things stuck to Isiah Thomas.
Playing in his 5th All-Star game from the Detroit Pistons, number 11, Isiah Thomas.
Isiah all the way, Isiah Thomas.
How does it feel to be the greatest basketball player in the world for another day?
Unreal.
I'm so proud of you, son. I'm so proud of you. Don't cry, be happy.
Winning his 2nd All-Star Game MVP in 1986, Isiah Thomas enjoyed widespread popularity. Yet he never quite reached the transcendent heights shared by the very few.
Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and Michael Jordan were the people that the league presented as the individuals who vaulted the NBA into prominence. And I think he resented the fact that he was not included in that group.
It's very important to him to be on that plateau with those guys. And absolutely, he wanted to measure up in games the way those guys did.
Isiah's feelings toward a rookie named Jordan were questioned after the 1985 All-Star Game. He was accused of leading a freeze-out of Jordan, who shot 2 for 9.
When Michael Jordan came to All-Star Weekend that week, he had a lot of jewelry on. He had his Nike paraphernalia on. There was a feeling, I think, among some that Michael was trying to be bigger than the other players there.
And Magic played the pass to Michael Jordan, and Isiah Thomas took it himself.
If there's one thing that I'm not good at is playing politics and being political. Every time that he's talked about it and that I've talked about it, we both said that there was nothing to it.
Isiah was almost a legendary figure in Chicago. There was some resentments on Thomas's part because here was this guy stepping into his town. Here's this guy coming in, stealing my city.
Tension between Thomas and Jordan increased as the Bulls lost 3 straight playoffs to the Bad Boys from 1988 to 1990.
Jordan comes in and he wants to win championships, but he can't. Who's standing in the way? Isiah Thomas. And then they devised the Jordan rules, and it got ugly.
Michael on the move, He is necktie. Michael Jordan goes down hard, and he comes up ready to swing.
And Jordan found himself on the floor. Jordan was hurt, and Isiah was the one standing above him.
In 1991, when the Bulls were about to dispose of Detroit in the playoffs, Thomas organized a walkout.
They were insulted a way that they had been treated by Chicago's players. Some of the things had been said. So I went to Isiah, as I recall, and said, don't do this, you'll regret it.
Pistons wasting no time in getting out of here. They left the bench, although there's 7 and 9 seconds remaining. The Pistons just left.
Anybody that didn't shake their hands, whether it be Isiah or whoever else on the team, it's a personal decision for them. We're all men. You have to make decisions. You have to live with them.
4 months later, when the selections for the U.S. Olympic Dream Team were announced, Thomas was not among them. Feeling he was the victim of a freeze-out, the 9-time All-Star claimed foul play.
The rules always changed for me. They wanted people who had won championships. At that time, there was only 2 people on that team who had won more championships than myself. I've been around sports long enough to know that there's a committee that selects, and then there's another group of people in the back room that selects.
Jordan played a big role in keeping Isiah off that team. Michael never specifically said, I don't want Isiah Thomas on the team. He was shown a list of who was on the team, and when Isiah Thomas's name initially was on one of those lists, he didn't want to play.
I talked to Isiah about the aspect he wasn't on the team, and he was not comfortable with it. I'm sure he is very hurt.
That affected him a lot more than he would ever tell anybody. You know, you hope for him that things that he may have done or said won't affect how people view him, because it's about what he did on the court.
He felt that he not only belonged, but should have been starting on that team. And so, really for the first time, someone said, you're not a Magic, you're not a Bird, you're not a Jordan, you're not even a John Stockton.
That November, Thomas scored 44 points against Stockton, the point guard who had been named to the Olympic team over him. The next time the Pistons met the Jazz, Stockton's enforcer and fellow Dream Teamer Karl Malone exacted what some saw as retaliation.
I think Karl Malone was trying to send a message to Isiah. It was a brutal, terrible way to send a message.
Now to go. Isiah Thomas hurt badly.
The flagrant foul cost Malone $10,000 and a one-game suspension. Thomas paid with 40 stitches over his left eye. This was injury added to insult. A month earlier, the Bulls' Scottie Pippen labeled the Pistons guard a cheap shot artist and declared he wouldn't play in the Dream Team if Thomas was added to the roster.
In some ways, that 92 snub may have validated the feeling Isiah Thomas came with at the very beginning, that someone was trying to steal something that belonged to him. Maybe those phantoms that he thought were out there to get him, you can say that they were illusory, but his not being on the 92 Olympic team would suggest that they were real.
Dawkins with a steal. Took it from Isiah.
By the early 1990s, age and injury had taken its toll on Isiah's bad boys, leaving them with more bark than bite. In 1993, they slipped below 500. The following April, the wheels came off. Thomas suffered an Achilles tear, and the Pistons finished with just 20 wins. Thomas called it quits with a career average of 19 points and 9 assists.
I will be a Piston for my entire career. I'm also able to announce that I will be a Piston for the rest of my life.
Thomas had reached an agreement with owner Bill Davidson in January of 1994 to work in the team's front office upon his retirement. But soon after the season ended, things changed.
There's a philosophical difference, maybe caused by overaggression, but we just parted ways.
Isiah didn't have patience. I think Isiah has never had patience. He's always wanted to get to the top immediately.
Later that May, Thomas found a new basketball home. As vice president and general manager of the Toronto Raptors, he also received a piece of the new franchise.
We thought that we would be in Detroit. We had no idea that, we would end up spending the rest of our lives here in Toronto.
He drafted Damon Stoudemire when that was those were the two guys, point guard, mentor, student, and you could see him connecting with a guy like Damon on a different level that a lot of general managers at that point didn't.
And I shouldn't do this, but I'm gonna kiss you. Because I love you.
Isiah's love affair in Toronto fell on hard times when he differed with head coach Brendan Malone.
Isiah wanted to develop kids. They play Orlando, and they're getting killed. And Brendan's got on the court 5 kids who just probably can't play in the league. But he's teaching, you can see him teaching Isiah. He's trying to show Isiah, look, man, this is what you gave me.
Damon Stoudemire came up to me at the end of the Milwaukee game, and I said, are we supposed to be losing games? Because he's saying, why are these guys playing?
He likes being Isiah. He burned bridges with a lot of people in the boardroom, and I think that's because he is very headstrong. He's very dominant. I want this to happen my way.
Frustrated by his inability to sway fellow ownership in the direction he wanted, Thomas vacated his post and sold his share of the team in November of 1997. While working as an NBA analyst for NBC, he purchased the Continental Basketball Association 2 years later for $10 million.
Isiah had this huge dream. He thought that the NBA would see that he was in charge of it and make it sort of like minor league basketball. The NBA and the CBA would be almost one.
Isiah promised the CBA owners that they were going to be the Microsoft of basketball. He actually told them that they would multiply the league by geometric proportions, and he was going to put together a whole package of sponsors. Instead of having the local car dealer, they were going to have Ford Motor Company as a sponsor.
And less than a year into it, he says, why am I running this league and making road trips to La Crosse, Wisconsin, and to Sioux Falls? I've got a $5 million NBA coaching job.
I would like to introduce our next head coach, Isiah Thomas, and just say that it's great to have him back here in Indiana.
In July of 2000, Thomas signed a $20 million 4-year contract to coach the Indiana Pacers. In the process, he began pulling the cord on the CBA. In February of 2001, he suspended play, and 15 days later, the league was forced into bankruptcy.
Isiah personally killed the CBA. These owners loved what they were doing, and you should hear the language they use now in reference to Isiah Thomas.
the CBA was borderline bankruptcy then. So the only way that I saw that it could really survive was as a single entity. But once the NBA decided that they wanted to compete in the minor leagues against the CBA, the game's over.
If we get pressure in the backcourt, Jay Rose, if we get pressure in the backcourt, you can come up, help bring it up.
After a third straight opening round playoff exit in 2003, Pacers president Larry Bird disposed of his old nemesis that August. 4 months later, the Knicks tapped Thomas as their president of basketball operations.
Let's face it, you're talking about one of the most storied franchises in all of sport. So it's a golden opportunity. It's literally a once-in-a-lifetime type scenario.
I think he's always looking for the ultimate situation for him, and I don't think he knows what it would be if he got it. I think he's always seeking, searching, climbing the mountain.
Over the next 2 seasons, Thomas disposed of 2 legendary coaches, Lenny Wilkens and Larry Brown, and was named in a sexual harassment lawsuit, while New York posted 2 of the worst records in franchise history.
Showtime!
Larry Brown's just got to be beside himself.
In the summer of 2006, Knicks chairman Jim Dolan dispatched Thomas to the front lines, naming him coach with an ultimatum to improve the team.
Isiah Thomas has 1 year to turn around the Knicks. That's the gauntlet thrown down by Madison Square Garden chairman James Dolan.
Isiah Thomas has to find some way to put that ragtag second-rate team, which he put together, on his back and find some way to imbue his own incredible strength and survivorship spirit to other people.
You have to realize he's been in much more difficult situations in his life. He's overcome a lot more than a difficult situation as a head coach in the New York Knicks.
Despite his struggles as a coach and executive, Thomas will always be remembered as one of the great point guards ever to play. With his wife Lynn and 2 children at his side, he reached the ultimate individual goal in October of 2000 when he entered the Basketball Hall of Fame, fulfilling a dream that began half a lifetime ago on Chicago's West Side.
My honor, my privilege to introduce Isiah Thomas.
I stand here before you tonight as the proud son of Mary Thomas. She would sit us down on meeting nights and tell us how she fought hard for us to grow up to be men and to have a fair chance and a fair shot.
He went back and walking through the neighborhood, and one of the old guys was sitting on a stoop, and Isiah remembered him, and they shook hands, and he said, "You made it, Isiah. You made it out of here, didn't you?" And Isiah smiled and said, "Yeah."
Isiah Thomas was once asked about the hit TV series Survivor, which was filmed in the Outback and other dangerous places. He smiled and said, if they want a real test of survival, they ought to drop them in the west side of Chicago. You should know, Isiah Thomas was the ultimate survivor. For SportsCentury, I'm Chris Fowler.